MS Now's Kevin Fry reporting on the ground in Alexandria, Virginia. Yasmin Radjy is executive director of Swing Left. Kevin, how does turnout look today? What are folks there doing and saying?
Well, we've seen a steady trickle of folks heading into the polling place behind me. In the lead up to Election Day itself, voter turnout has been quite remarkable across the state, almost on par with last year's gubernatorial race. And keep in mind, that was a normal standard November election. This is a bit of an oddity here in Virginia in the middle of April, but obviously there are national ramifications here. Now, Democratic leader Hakeem Jeffries, who obviously would like to see this referendum pass, it'll help him buttress in the midterms his effort to become the next Speaker of the House next year. He is doing some expectation setting, saying that Virginia is a purple state. And certainly some of the polling leading up today suggested that this is going to be incredibly tight, potentially in the single digits. And we got a taste of the variety of opinions that could lead to that sort of tight margin as we talked to some voters a little earlier today. Take a listen.
I voted no. I like the competition between the two parties.
Well, at first it sounded like a bad thing happened, so we're doing a bad thing to negate that. But when I really looked into the history of voter suppression in our country, it is clear that instead of our elected leaders trying to provide what the people want, they have used tactics like this to suppress the vote. And this is one way to close that gap a little bit.
I'm just opposed to gerrymandering because I do think it is the voters that should make the decisions, and I don't think the politicians should try to engineer an outcome, no matter how, good the cause is.
That last voter in particular is pretty notable. She told me she's a Democrat who was very much in support of the 2020 constitutional amendment here that created an independent body to help draw the maps. And basically, she said on principle, she can't vote for reinstituting, in her view, gerrymandering here in the Commonwealth of Virginia. Now, speaking to kind of the critical macro level of all of this, we have seen redistricting now in Texas. In response, there was a Democratic-led effort in California. A few other states have also moved one or two seats to the right or to the left, respectively. If Democrats can pull off a win with a yes vote here in Virginia, that could essentially mean that the two parties have battled to essentially nil, that they've basically balanced each other out. If Republicans succeed in getting a no vote here on this referendum, they could end up being a little bit ahead in the net in terms of going into the midterm elections.
All right. So, Yasmin, let me ask you about what we've been seeing, because I guess you could call this an off election, right? This is not a presidential. This is not the midterms. So we look at the early voting numbers. Over 1 million people cast ballots before today. Does that give us any clues?
Yeah, I think this is an election in a state where people are the most used to voting. As you said, it's an off year election, but Virginians vote not just in the even years like the rest of the country. They vote in the odd years. So they're used to turning out in these odd years or in these sort of off moments. The early voting numbers are looking good. But as you heard in that previous segment, what the Republicans have been doing is spreading so much disinformation and confusion about what this redistricting measure is, that while, we feel good about the momentum on our side, this is going to be one of those critical elections that comes down to tight margins. And so that's why Swing Left volunteers, just like volunteers all across the Virginia Democratic Party, are spending every minute of the day phone banking for that final turnout, because even with good early voting, even with strong turnout, we've got to make sure that the folks who are on the side of really fighting fire with fire and making sure that we tilt the balance of power away from Donald Trump actually have the information that this election is about that, and they may not have that yet. So every phone call, every door knocked matters still.
Yeah, voters have expressed confusion over whether they're supposed to vote yes or no, frankly. Example, even though President Obama supports obviously the redistricting effort, his image has been used on flyers and in videos urging voters to vote no. Meantime, President Trump's image has been featured on a billboard for the Yes campaign. So I'm curious, because what you guys do at Swing Left is grassroots. What are your volunteers hearing? Are they hearing that confusion? And to what extent you think a phone call or a door knock at this late hour can make a difference?
Absolutely. I think there's been a really intentional effort by the other side to both sow disinformation about what is on the line, what this election is all about, and also to make it sound like Democrats are the boogeyman here, when we've got to remember, as your colleague put up, the different states where these redistricting fights have happened all across the country. We've got to remember that this battle started because Republicans knew that Trump's policies and what Trump is doing are tremendously unpopular. And so they began this crazy journey we've been on together of trying mid-cycle redistricting, because they know historically, and with the trend lines of how unpopular Donald Trump is, he's going to lose the midterms. He is probably going to lose by a big margin. And Republicans have done what they do best, which is try to rig the rules in their favor, because they know they are out of step with where people are. And I think what we've heard loud and clear across the country, and certainly in Virginia, with, as your colleague said, the results of winning the governor's race and the 2 chambers of the legislature, was folks want to fight Trump, and they also want Democrats to fight fire with fire. That was a very clear message. This was a central reason why Democrats won in such a sweep last year in 2025 in Virginia. And now what we're seeing is this ballot initiative is on the ballot, as folks promised, but that doesn't mean that folks are necessarily connecting the dots. Voters are busy, and that is why every organizer, every volunteer making those phone calls to remind folks, you want fighters and Democrats, you want to put a check on Trump, what he's doing is harming you. This ballot initiative is essential to making sure not just that Virginians have a voice, but also that the balance of power is flipped in this November's election, and we win back the House. And as your colleague said, and I just want to really underline this point, right now there are 6 Democrats representing Virginia and 5 Republicans. If this ballot measure passes, the makeup will most likely become 10 Democrats to 1 Republican. The balance of power in the House is an even smaller margin. It's only 3 seats that Democrats need to win. So if we shift by 4 in Virginia, that tips us over the edge of winning in the midterm. So when we say this is the most important election since Donald Trump has been elected, I know we say that a lot, but it really, really means that here. Virginia is not just ground zero for the redistricting fight. It is the most important of all the redistricting fights in terms of the math is the math is the math on how we win the House. And so if folks are feeling motivated, are wanting to make sure that voters are getting the right information about this election, they can go to swingleft.org/VA. And from wherever they might be in the country, they can call voters and make sure those dots are getting connected and folks are turning out in this critical election.
Yasmin Radjy, thank you so much. We appreciate you coming on the show.